following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Our focus continues to be on the escalating Israel-Hamas war. Israeli forces today stormed al-Shifa, Gaza's largest hospital, which is now at the heart of the Israel-Hamas war. Israeli forces have been raiding al-Shifa, calling it a precise and targeted operation. According to some reports, tanks have entered the hospital courtyard and troops are searching buildings and interrogating people in the compound. Israel has claimed the al-Shifa hospital sits on top of a Hamas command and control center and that a lot of ammunition lies in the tunnels underneath the hospital. It's an allegation denied by both the hospital officials and Hamas. Hundreds of patients and staff remain inside al-Shifa even at this time. A doctor at al-Shifa said they were given 30 minutes warning before the Israeli operation began. Dr. Khalid Abu Samra said, "We were asked to stay clear of the windows and the balconies. We can hear the armored vehicles. They are very close to the entrance of the complex." The operation comes amid Israel's escalating ground offensive in Gaza aimed at destroying Hamas. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has claimed that Hamas has lost control in northern Gaza, including in Gaza City. Conditions at the al-Shifa hospital have deteriorated rapidly in recent days amid the intense fighting, with doctors warning of a catastrophic situation for the patients, staff and displaced Palestinian civilians who are still inside. At least 179 people, including scores of babies, have been buried in a mass grave in the al-Shifa compound. Some who are on the ground say the scene is horrifying. The smell of the dead people is unbearable. Most of the bodies are of women and children. Remember, hospitals are protected in times of war under international humanitarian law. But Israel says Hamas's continued military use of the Shifa hospital jeopardizes its protected status. The United States too has claimed that some newly declassified intelligence shows that Hamas and the Islamic Jihad are using hospitals, including al-Shifa, as a way to conceal and support their military operations and hold hostages. The Israeli Defense Forces say so far no hostages have been found inside al-Shifa. One of Israel's stated objectives in this war is to rescue the almost 250 hostages who are being held by Hamas. Palestinian Health Minister Dr. Mai Al-Kaila has said the Israeli army raid represents a new crime against humanity, medical staff and patients, and could have catastrophic consequences. Her health ministry is based in Ramallah in the West Bank and falls under the control of the Palestinian Authority and is separate from the Hamas-controlled health ministry in Gaza. A statement from Hamas has blamed both Israel and the United States, President Biden in particular, for the Israeli army raid at the hospital. The statement says, by supporting Israel's false narrative that Hamas has been using al-Shifa as a command and control base, the United States has given Israel a green light to commit more massacres against civilians. Doctors and journalists have described catastrophic conditions inside al-Shifa, including desperate efforts to keep premature babies alive and limited procedures taking place by candlelight or phone light. Reports say people inside the hospital are starving. There is no food or drinkable water. There's barely tap water available for an hour a day. Thousands of Palestinians are also believed to be sheltering in and around al-Shifa, seeking to escape Israel's air and ground offensive. The World Health Organization says it has lost touch with health personnel at al-Shifa hospital. The WHO chief, Tedros Ghebreyesus, has said reports of military incursion into al-Shifa hospital are deeply concerning. We've lost touch again with health personnel at the hospital. We're extremely worried for their and their patients' safety. Israel declared war on Hamas and launched a complete siege of the enclave following Hamas's terror attacks in Israel on the 7th of October that left 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, dead. Almost 250 people were also taken hostage. Since then, the Israeli counter-offensive has killed at least 11,200 Palestinians, including over 4,600 children and 3,100 women, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. And remember, this data is at least 3 days old. No new figures have been put out. Now, as the Palestinian death toll rises with every passing day, with more and more women, children and babies losing their lives, there is growing outrage around the world. Heartbreaking images of newborns at al-shifa laid side by side to keep them warm after incubators stopped working due to power cuts have drawn the world's attention to the humanitarian crisis unfolding there. But Israel continues to rebuff all calls for a ceasefire. The outrage is not only in the Arab world, but increasingly being witnessed even in Western countries, most of which had come out in support of Israel just a few weeks ago. French President Emmanuel Macron has repeatedly called for a ceasefire. President Biden has said hospitals in Gaza must be protected. And now a war of words has erupted between Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Trudeau has said, and I quote, "I urge the government of Israel to exercise maximum restraint. The world is watching on television and on social media. We are hearing the testimonies of doctors, family members, survivors, and children who've lost their parents. The world is witnessing this killing of women, of children, of babies. This has to stop." That's what Justin Trudeau has said. In a sharp response to Trudeau's remarks, Netanyahu said, "It is Hamas and not Israel that should be held accountable." Referring to the 7th October terror attacks that left 1,200 Israelis dead, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, "It is not Israel that is deliberately targeting civilians, but Hamas, which beheaded, burnt and massacred civilians in the worst horrors perpetrated on Jews since the Holocaust. While Israel is doing everything to keep civilians out of harm's way, Hamas is doing everything to keep them in harm's way." Arguing that Israel provides civilians in Gaza humanitarian corridors and safe zones while Hamas prevents them from leaving at gunpoint, Netanyahu said, "It is Hamas, not Israel, that should be held accountable for committing a double war crime, targeting civilians while hiding behind civilians. The forces of civilization must back Israel in defeating Hamas barbarism." That is what Netanyahu said.
And I want to say something about hospitals that number one, we want hospitals to be protected. We don't want to see any civilians, and certainly not babies in incubators or other vulnerable populations caught in a crossfire. We want Hamas to stop using hospitals as a command post. That would be the easiest way to solve this problem, if they would stop using the civilians that are in hospitals as humanitarian shields. But then I would also say that we want there to be safe evacuation for patients at hospitals so they can get out of harm's way. We would support an independent third party or respected third party to conduct those evacuations. We know the government of Israel would support such a step as well. They have said that they would support such a step. The question is, will Hamas allow patients to be evacuated from hospitals, or will they continue to use them as human shields? We think an appropriate step would be to support those evacuations so babies and other vulnerable populations are not in harm's way. The Secretary has made very clear that we condemn extremist violence and harassment against Palestinians. He had a very direct conversation with the Prime Minister about it. What he said to the Prime Minister and other members of the Israeli War Cabinet is that the extremist violence against settlers is unacceptable, that we think the government needs to do more to rein it in, and they need to do more to hold people accountable, and we will be watching to see what steps they take.
The IDF is conducting a ground operation in Gaza to defeat Hamas and rescue our hostages. Israel is at war with Hamas, not with the civilians in Gaza. In recent weeks, the IDF has publicly warned time and again that Hamas's continued military use of Shifa hospital jeopardizes its protected status under the international law. Based on intelligence information and an operational necessity, IDF forces are carrying out a precise and targeted operation against Hamas in a specified area in the Shifa hospital.
Hamas must not, should not use a place like a hospital as a shield for their presence. That is as strong a statement under humanitarian law as is the statement that the hospital should not become a place of a war zone of danger. We find these two issues equally important and equally understandable for both sides. Our concern on the humanitarian side is for the welfare of the patients of that hospital, which is, of course, in great peril at the moment. We have no fuel to run it. The babies have no incubators, newly born. Some are dead already. We can't move them out. It's too dangerous. Our concern is for the patients of a hospital that doesn't function. I understand the Israelis' concern for trying to find the leadership of Hamas. That's not our problem. Our problem is protecting the people of Gaza from what's been visited upon them.
People involved every single day. I believe it's going to happen, but I don't want to get into detail.
What's your message for the families?
Hang in there, we're coming.
Will you sign the CR?
Mr. President, is a report
What do you like about it?
reporting that Israel and Hamas are close to a deal for the release of 70 of the hostages. Is there anything you can add to that?
No.
All right. Joining me on the show tonight is Ambassador Arthur Lenk, former Israeli diplomat. He joins us live from Israel. We also have with us Professor Uriel Abuluf at the School of Political Science, Government and International Affairs in Tel Aviv. And completing the panel tonight is Ambassador Manju Seth, former Indian diplomat. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining me. I want to start with Ambassador Arthur Lenk, but before I put my first question to him, I want to quickly read out for him and our viewers the statement that has been made just a few minutes ago by the World Health Organization chief, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus. Here is what he has said. For the past 3 days, WHO has not received updates on the number of deaths or injuries in Gaza, which makes it harder for us to evaluate the functioning of the health system. What we know is that only 1/4 of Gaza's hospitals are still functioning. 26 out of 36 hospitals are now closed, either due to damage, attacks, or because they have run out of fuel. Patients, healthcare workers, and ambulances are not able to enter or exit some hospitals. Prior to the conflict, there were around 3,500 hospital beds across Gaza. Today, there are an estimated 1,400. There are many more patients than beds. Doctors and nurses are having to make impossible decisions on who lives and who dies. Significantly, he goes on to say Israel's military incursion into al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City is totally unacceptable. Hospitals are not battlegrounds. We are extremely worried for the safety of staff and patients. Protecting them is paramount. The WHO has lost contact with health workers at al-Shifa. But one thing is clear, under international humanitarian law, health facilities, health workers, ambulances and patients must be safeguarded and protected against all acts of war. So let me begin with Ambassador Arthur Lenk and seek his reaction to what the WHO chief has just said, calling Israel's military incursion into al-Shifa hospital completely unacceptable, saying hospitals are not battlegrounds. Your response, Ambassador?
Hi, good evening, Neha. They shouldn't be battlegrounds. They should be safe places for people to be treated and taken care of, and not human shields for terrorists. Israel has a real dilemma. And that's why, I don't know, I was with you last week, and we're continuing this conversation, and Israel isn't flying in and doing using all of its power that it could on this hospital. It's going precise, targeted, slowly. It's been giving warnings for weeks, literally weeks. It's tried to bring in humanitarian aid to the hospital, and Hamas stopped it from happening. Israel has a real dilemma. How do you protect the people in a hospital? Hospitals are holy until they're defiled by terrorism, by Hamas. And Israel is finding a way, is doing the best it can. It's really trying to find a way to take care to not hurt the Palestinian people, but at the same time fight our vicious enemy, Hamas, that carried it out the most vicious massacres and is holding hostages and is just cynical about the respect that the rest of the world has for humanitarian norms. It's a joke almost to Hamas saying, oh, let's use a hospital, let's use an ambulance, let's use women and children, let's use babies to protect our terrorists. That's awful. That's just awful. And the world can't let that happen.
You know, you're right. There is not even any remote justification for what Hamas has done and continues to do. The question, however, is, are the people of Gaza, and we're talking about 2.3 million people, being collectively punished for the terror acts of Hamas, an organization that nobody here is trying to support, justify or express any sympathy for? But yes, just as our sympathies lie with those Israelis who were brutally massacred and butchered on the 7th of October, a lot of us also have our sympathies with the innocent Palestinians who are losing their lives every single day, being caught in the crossfire between Israel and Hamas. Let me go across to Professor Uriel Abuluf. Professor Abuluf, you were on my show last night where we were discussing the deteriorating condition at al-Shifa hospital. And today, 24 hours later, we have a situation where Israeli forces have gone ahead and stormed this hospital. For the benefit of our viewers, I want to quickly mention a few important facts pertaining to this hospital, which, as we know, is Gaza's largest. In the last few days, 179 people, including scores of little babies, have been buried in a mass grave in the al-Shifa compound. God knows how many people have been killed here, how many more will lose their lives. The figures that we got were from 3 days ago, suggesting that at least 11,200 Palestinians have been killed. 40% of these were children, more than 4,600, who I can bet were not Hamas. 3,100 were women, most of whom I am pretty sure were not Hamas, and these are 3-day-old figures. God knows how many more have died in the last 72 hours. And as we speak, there are tanks, Israeli tanks, stationed inside al-Shifa hospital. And the doctors there say they were given 30 minutes warning before this operation began. And it's not Hamas saying it, it's not the Palestinians saying it, it is the World Health Organization chief saying, you cannot turn hospitals into battlegrounds. This incursion is unacceptable. This hospital today, Professor, is being described as a mass grave, as a cemetery. What does one say?
It is truly horrible, truly horrible. And look, I don't know about the exact numbers, but very clearly there were many civilians who are not involved in one way or another, innocent civilians who lost their life in this war, and it's been over a month now. And now it really gets to the heart of it, at least in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Now, I don't know what is underground. I don't know whether or not Hamas headquarters are really underground, but both Israel and the US recently have stated that there is clear intelligence indicated as much. They also indicated that potentially some of the hostages, the Israeli hostages, are underground as well. And that's another possibility, although I imagine that many of them might be smuggled away to the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Either way, it seems to me like the hospital is a scene of captives and hostages, both underground and above ground. Perhaps underground we have Israeli hostages, but above ground we have Palestinian hostages. And both are effectively held by Hamas. Because I think that Israel would readily approve a third party engaging and delivering those who are in the hospital and are in great need of medical care to be evacuated from the hospital. if only Hamas allows that. But Hamas has repeatedly said, his leaders have repeatedly said explicitly, there is nothing to hide as far as they are concerned, that they wouldn't mind millions of people dying for the cause. They wouldn't mind millions of Palestinians dying for the cause that they have prescribed to them, whereas the majority of Palestinians are opposing Hamas. And as I told you yesterday, public opinion polls indicate that Hamas was at its lowest in terms of public support just before the attack. And perhaps the two aspects are connected. Perhaps Hamas chose that specific timing. They have worked on that attack for about 2 years, but perhaps they chose that specific timing not just because of the peace process between Israel and Saudi Arabia, but also because they knew the Palestinians by and large reject their way. And now they are holding 2.4 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip hostage. And it's devastating. And I think the whole world should think hard what is the best way to approach it, because there is no way to resolve it on the long term. Unless Hamastan, I wouldn't say Hamas specifically because it's also ideology, it's hard to get rid of, but Hamastan, the state of Hamas, should be dismantled. And right now, the only military force around to be able to carry that is Israel. Obviously, if all Hamas leadership would have just left the Gaza Strip, all of this could have just ended. But Hamas wouldn't leave the Gaza Strip. They would rather have 1 million Palestinians killed, and God forbid this will happen. But they would rather have 1 million Palestinians killed and not leave the Gaza Strip.
Let's say what you're saying is correct, Professor, but I want to ask you then, you know, you will then turn around and say if 1 million Palestinians do die, their blood will be on the hands of the Hamas terrorists. But will their blood not equally be on Israel's hands?
Well, I think that the key word in your question is equally. I can't imagine 1 million Palestinians killed. I don't think that anything even remotely close to that should happen. Israel, I think, does whatever it can, or at least I hope it does whatever it can in order to minimize the number of innocent civilians as casualties. I don't see any indication that the IDF is deliberately targeting civilians. If there is any such evidence, I would like to see it, and I will condemn it wholeheartedly. This will be abhorrent. We have seen such elements, not by the IDF, but by settlers in the West Bank. We have seen clearly elements of that, and this is abhorrent. But the IDF, as a rule, as far as I know, has never deliberately targeted civilians. You can look at the pictures now. The IDF is delivering medical equipment to the hospital. And I'm certain that the IDF will allow, is it trying to foster the third party up to the hospital in order to evacuate those who are in grave need for medical treatment. That is obviously the right way to approach it.
Okay,
but
you say...
So far, Hamas is against it.
Okay, you say IDF is not deliberately targeting civilians, it is delivering aid to Gaza. Fact of the matter is, over 11,000 Palestinians, most of them civilians, are dead in the last 5 weeks of this Israeli counteroffensive that we have seen. These are hard facts. Let me go across to Ambassador Manju Seth at this point. Ambassador Seth, Israel says that al-Shifa hospital is on top of Hamas's command and control center. There is a lot of ammunition in the underground tunnels beneath this hospital, which is why we had no option but to go in. This is an allegation that has been denied by both the hospital authorities and Hamas. The question really is that we are talking about 2.3 million Palestinians who are caught in the crossfire between Israel and Hamas. And thousands of innocent Palestinians have already been killed. It's all very well for Israelis to say the blood of these innocent Palestinians is on the hands of Hamas. But ma'am, do you not believe that 5 weeks into this war, that moment has come where the world is increasingly accusing Israel of carrying out a genocide of Palestinians, that the blood of these innocent Palestinians is on the hands of Israel? How do you deal with a situation such as this? Because Israel continues to rebuff all international calls for a ceasefire.
I think what has happened is unfortunate, the way things have continued for so long. I think there have been calls for ceasefire, for pause, but the Israelis somehow, the Israeli government feels that if it does give in at this moment, it will be a kind of acknowledgement of defeat and giving up to the Hamas. And Hamas, of course, would be very happy because they have started this whole thing from all accounts. And they were expecting, I think, this kind of retaliation. It was something that was expected. And I think it was a deliberate move, as mentioned by my other co-panelists, that it seems it was a deliberate, well-timed attack by the Hamas. And they knew that the Israeli forces are going to, disproportionately respond to this. And unfortunately, the large number of civilian deaths that have taken place are very unfortunate, and really, though, as a lot of people say, it's a fallout of war, it's a consequence of war, but I think it was not necessary, it was not required that all this happened. But I think the Israeli forces were left with very little choice, I think, at the end of the day. But now I do think that some objectives, the main objective that they wanted to release, have the hostages released, that has not yet been met, I think. So I think Israel would not like to back down. But at the same time, there are reports that the Qataris, the US, and others in the Arab world, or Middle East, are trying to negotiate, find a solution, talking to the Hamas as well. And the Hamas also needs to understand that it doesn't have much sympathy for, the Palestinians do not have much sympathy for Hamas. It is a terrorist organization and people don't want to associate with it. But because it has all the guns and the ammunition and everything, it is able to run its writ actually in Gaza. And so the people are unfortunately unintended victims of this and the rest of the world has now is trying to put pressure on Israel, and there are negotiations going on, I believe, and we hope that negotiations will on both sides. The Hamas also needs to release all the hostages. Which is
I'm not saying for a moment that Hamas should not release the hostages, but when you say that Hamas needs to understand that it does not enjoy much support amongst the Palestinians, we will have to remind ourselves they are a terror organization. They cannot be expected to see reason, logic, or have any sympathy even for the Palestinian people, who undoubtedly they have happily sacrificed in this war. However, the question is a civilized country expected to respond in a fashion similar to that of a terror organization? I think that is the question that Israel will need to answer very soon, because many have said the window of legitimacy for Israel's actions in Gaza may well have closed. I want to go back to Ambassador Arthur Lenk. Ambassador Lenk, I want to ask you two questions. Many have been saying, how many more Palestinians need to die before Israel believes that it has either avenged the 7th October massacre or won this war against Hamas? That's my first question to you. Second, what do you make of the fact that even Western countries that in the immediate aftermath of 7th October came out in full support of Israel, now may be singing a different tune? President Biden has said categorically, hospitals must be protected at any cost. The French President Emmanuel Macron has repeatedly called for a ceasefire, and now a war of words has erupted between Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, and your Prime Minister. And I want to quote Justin Trudeau. He says, "I urge the government of Israel to exercise maximum restraint. The world is watching on TV and social media. We are hearing the testimonies of doctors, families, survivors, and kids who've lost their parents. The world is witnessing this killing of women, of children, of babies. This has to stop." This is not Hamas talking, this is not Palestinians talking, this is not me talking. These are leaders of Western countries that had thus far stood in support of Israel. So I'm going to ask you, sir, Is the narrative not shifting? Is the mood of the world not changing very, very fast? And yes, my first question, how many more Palestinians will end up as collateral damage?
Yeah, Nia, it's interesting. You have 3 different panelists tonight, 2 from Israel and 1 from India. All of them are talking in a minor voice. No one is celebrating. All 3, 2 Israelis and 1 Indian, have shown empathy for the Palestinian civilians that are abused by Hamas. All of them have emphasized that the dilemmas that Israel faced have no easy solutions. All 3 of us have also said that a ceasefire now offers a victory for Hamas and an object lesson for terrorist organizations around the world. There are 79 prescribed terror groups in India. They're watching us. They're looking at what's happening in Gaza right now. And if Hamas gets a get-out-of-jail-free card, if people somehow convince Israel to stop, what are those organizations going to take away? What are they going to take home for the next time that they put your country in danger or any other country in danger? The truth is this is really, really, really a war against from civilization against anarchy and violence. And the only way out is for Hamas to be defeated. Israel, over 5 weeks, has sent messages to Palestinian people, has enabled humanitarian corridors, has allowed in humanitarian supplies. You showed photographs of humanitarian medical equipment being brought into the hospitals. Israel's doing everything it possibly can. No, it's not behaving like a terrorist organization. Your words, Neha, those are wrong words. Israel is behaving like a civilized country with a dilemma, with hard choices that a country like India or the United States or Canada fears having to face. But we're facing them responsibly, with consideration, and doing our best to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Okay, just to clarify, Ambassador, I did not suggest that Israel is acting like a terror organization. What I said is that Hamas is a terror organization. The last thing we can expect from them is logic, sympathy, reasoning, or any kind of compassion. But surely a civilized country like Israel is expected to do better. And when you draw parallels between Israel and a country like India, given that we too have been victims of terrorism for decades now, state-sponsored terrorism exported by Pakistan, and we had a moment very similar to yours. We refer to it as the 26/11 attacks, the Mumbai attacks, that shook this country and that were possibly the worst terror attack on Indian soil in its entire history. I do want to say this one more time. I said it last night. I have to say it again. We did not bomb Pakistan to Stone Age. The question here is about whether the response has been a disproportionate and excessive one. One more question for you, Ambassador, before I go back to the professor. I wanted to know from you, what do you make of the fact that not only is there now growing international pressure on Israel because of the rising death toll in Palestinians, especially of children, little babies, increasingly some of your closest allies seem to be very uncomfortable with what's happening. Look at what the French president has said. Look at what the Canadian Prime Minister has said today. What do you make of that?
You've read that to me twice now, and I've responded that they and we understand that the dilemmas are real, that the Palestinian people deserve better. But the fault doesn't lie with Israel. And Israel has to find a way. And India and France and Canada and the United States need Israel to find a way, because perhaps what happened on the 26th of November in 2009 will be different next time, because people are taking notes. People are watching. The next ISIS is saying, do you know what? If Hamas somehow pulls this off, if Hamas stays in power, if they continue to threaten Israel from the south and Hezbollah can continue to threaten from the north, Iran has won. And this is not an issue of anti-Muslim. It's not a targeting of the Palestinian public. It's a finding a way for this violence and terror and horror and massacres to be put away, and for lessons to be learned that it can't happen in India, and that it can happen in France, and it can happen in the United States.
Well, one cannot disagree with you that there should be, in an ideal world, no terrorism at all. Israel should not be a victim of terrorism. Indians should not be victims of terrorism. Neither should Palestinians. But the reality today is a very different one, a very ugly and disturbing one. So let me go across to Professor Uriel Abuluf at this point. Professor, I come back to the same question. What is the way forward? Because what we are staring at is not just a situation where the Palestinians are dying by the thousands, but one of stalemate, with Hamas saying we can talk about returning the hostages once Israel announces a ceasefire, and Israel saying no question of a ceasefire till the hostages are returned to us. Like I said, in the meantime, Palestinians are dying every day. What is the way forward? And frankly, isn't this a massive failure of the international community? You know, a moral failing on part of all of us?
I agree. I think that in many ways it's a moral and a practical failure of the international community. I believe the way forward should involve both military means and political means. Look, I second what the ambassador said. I think it might be sort of a historical lessons in that regard. I think we should all recall the Spanish Civil War and the message of those who were fighting the fascists at the time. And their slogan was, if you tolerate this, then your children will be next. And I think it is true. And we should devise ways in order to fight those fascists, those fanatics. And there are such people on all sides. There are fanatics in Israel too, who would like to see Israel going into civil war between Jews and Arabs, who would not like to see peace in the Middle East, and certainly wouldn't like to see a two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians. We have people like that in Israel. We have, of course, many people like that among the Palestinians. But I think the majority of both publics would like to see peace. And here I think the role of the West and of liberal democratic civilizations worldwide should be to support that effort. So I think that instead of emphasizing just the military aspect, which I appreciate Western leaders doing, because we should be very careful to abide by humanitarian highest standards possible. But we should also, I think very clearly, work to advance peace. And just, one word, if I may allow to, in terms of the analogy to India. If you think about the 2008 Mumbai attack, and try to, if you will, imagine Afghanistan tomorrow, and a certain coup d'etat going on in Pakistan. A coup d'etat taking hold. A party is taking over Pakistan. And that party, in its very platform, upholds that India should be destroyed, that there is no right of existence for India itself. Moreover, that all Hindu must be massacred, because their very existence is blasphemous towards God. And then they carry attack in India, and in proportion to the population, 150,000 Indians are killed, and about 30,000 are taken hostage. What would be India's reaction to that? Now, of course, you could not, and you, I think, wouldn't destroy Pakistan, right? You wouldn't drop an atomic weapon on Pakistan, even if Pakistan did not have an atomic weapon. You wouldn't do that. I hope at least you wouldn't. But you would fight it. And then there will have to be peace without those fanatics. And this is the great challenge. So I urge everyone, media, academia, world leaders, to support the military effort as long as it is targeting Hamas and Hamastan specifically. And to try and push Israel and Palestinians for peace. We have to give the peoples, both Israelis and Palestinians, hope for peace in order to truly win this war.
Okay, two quick points. I can assure you that India is a responsible democracy. We will never nuke another country. Our nuclear weapons are for peaceful purposes. And when you say that an organization like Hamas wants the Israeli state to cease to exist, and I understand the point that you're making, they are after all a terror organization, the unfortunate reality is that a vast number of Palestinians also feel that Israel wants to erase the existence of Palestinians, and leaders, far-right leaders like Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir have made a two-state solution virtually impossible. So there are two sides to this story. You know, your argument in principle is a fair one, but there is another aspect to this story. There is another version of this truth. I will give the last word to Ambassador Manju Seth as we wrap up this discussion. Ambassador Seth, again the question is, what is the way forward? And frankly, how much longer can the international community keep watching like a mute spectator as thousands and thousands of Palestinians continue to die every day? I keep saying this every single day, that when I express my sympathy for the Palestinian women and children and little babies who are dying, I am not expressing the least amount of sympathy for those terrorists who massacred Israelis on the 7th of October. I have no sympathy for any terrorist organization or terrorist in the world. Hang them, execute them, for all I care. The worry here is innocents are dying. How much longer can the international community continue to watch, and what really is the way ahead?
I think the international community has started trying to put some pressure on Israel. But again, as you very rightly said and other panelists have said, there cannot be a solution, one-sided solution. It has to be a solution where the demands of both sides are met to some extent. In the sense, it has to be give and take. And as rightly mentioned, Hamas has been saying that they don't want Israel to exist. And for Israelis, that is a major a point of going ahead and eliminating the Hamas for having this view. But in Israel, as mentioned, also there are some people who are like that. Fanatics are there everywhere. But in this particular case, I think Hamas is the dominant party in Gaza. And they have taken, whether by force or whatever, they are ruling there. They don't care about the people. Like all terrorists, they don't care about the people. They care only for themselves and their aims. And the international community, I think, has to get together, and the others in the region, there has been talk that others in the region are involved, and they're encouraging, Iran is encouraging, and other countries are encouraging that the war should go on. So that all these players in the Middle East also need to be taken on board by the US, by Israel, by others, and a settlement needs to be found on the way forward. And of course, I think Hamas needs to be in some ways not eliminated, but to be defanged, so to speak, so that they are not able to continue with their terrorist intent and their terror activity. They need to be
can they be successfully defanged? Because many have also wondered, is it really going to be so easy or simple for Israel to quote unquote wipe Hamas off the planet? Ambassador Arthur Lenk, final question to you, sir. Over the weekend, Prime Minister Netanyahu, in some interviews to the US media, hinted that a deal to secure the release of the hostages may well be in the works. Is there anything you could share with us about that? Of course, there's been speculation that there might be release of some Palestinian prisoners who are currently in Israeli jails. Do you see a deal working out in the foreseeable future?
Well, I hope so. The truth is the most important mission for us is to bring our brothers and sisters, our mothers and our children home from Gaza. They're being held by these rapists and murderers and terrorists, and And everywhere you go in Israel, there are no more advertisements on the streets. It's only signs calling for bringing these people home. And some hard decisions are going to have to be made in that regard. But hopefully that's going to happen soon, or at least the beginning of it. But at the same time, it's certainly not going to stop the challenge of defeating Hamas, you know what? And if I was going to end with a hashtag, is free Gaza from Hamas. Free Gaza, free the Palestinians. Let's save the Palestinian people from the horror that is Hamas.
Free Palestinians from Hamas by all means. But there's going to be another hashtag attached, added to yours. Don't kill Palestinians. I guess the two will probably need to go together. On that note, Ambassador Arthur Link, Professor Uriel Abuluf and Ambassador Manju Seth, thank you so much to all three of you for joining us and sharing your perspective with us. This is a story we'll continue to track very closely here on Global Lens. All right, time for us to take a quick break here on the show. But on the other side, a very important meeting coming up between US President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart. What can we expect on the other side of this short break?
Hamas attacks Israel. Israel Defense Forces strike back at Hamas.